On my 30th birthday, my rich aunt walked into my tiny apartment, stared at the flimsy paper decorations, and calmly asked, "Jasmine, is the $100,000 I sent you not enough to start your studio? Or did you and Kevin have trouble with the transfer?" I froze, and that was exactly when my husband and my mother-in-law walked in. The first thing Jasmine noticed was the smell of burnt wax and reheated takeout. 3 leaning candles flickered on a supermarket cake, frosting already starting to sweat under the weak ceiling fan. A crooked "Happy 30th" banner sagged above the living room window, held up with mismatched bits of tape. The cheap gold plastic cutlery reflected the yellow light in a way that made everything look even smaller, even more tired. Jasmine adjusted one of the paper plates, the one she'd drawn tiny flowers on, almost out of habit. Her fingers were still stained with a faint trace of blue paint from the commission she'd rushed to finish the night before. Her back ached, not from age, but from hours hunched over canvases at the tiny desk crammed into the corner of the living room, the same desk Kevin called her expensive little hobby station. She forced herself to smile. 30, she whispered. New decade, new life. That was the plan, anyway. For months, Jasmine had lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, taking extra shifts at her corporate job and squeezing in paid art commissions at night. Every dollar she earned, every bonus she got, she'd watched Kevin transfer into their future house fund, the sacred joint account he and his mother insisted on managing. "We have to be disciplined, Jazz," Kevin would say, patting her hand. "No risky art business until we're stable." Mom's right about that. Ruth never missed a chance to remind her either. "You can't build a home on paint and emotions," her mother-in-law had scoffed the last time she visited, eyeing Jasmine's sketchbook with open disdain. "You're almost 30. You should be thinking about security, not colors." Jasmine had laughed it off, like she always did, swallowing the sting. She told herself they were being practical. That one day, when the house was bought and things were settled, they'd finally support her studio dream. And then Aunt Eleanor called. Wealthy, sharp-tongued, and famously generous, Eleanor had always been the wild card of the family. She'd paid for Jasmine's art classes when she was a teenager, encouraged her to travel, to stop thinking like a clerk and start thinking like a creator. But they hadn't spoken much lately. Eleanor never hid the fact that she thought Jasmine had married small and settled into a life that didn't fit her talent. 2 weeks ago, her voice had come through the phone, clear and certain. 30 is a milestone, darling. You don't get to waste this decade. I'm going to help you start that studio. No arguments. Kevin had been oddly quiet that evening, hovering in the kitchen as Jasmine ended the call. The next day, he'd come home looking stressed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, about your aunt's gesture," he'd said carefully. "The bank said there was an issue with the transfer. International hold or something. They're looking into it." He'd even done the air quotes. Jasmine's excitement had deflated in an instant, replaced by an embarrassed kind of numbness. Of course. It had been too good to be true. She didn't ask to see the statements. She didn't call the bank. She just nodded and told herself to be grateful for the modest birthday he and Ruth were doing their best to afford. Now, on the night of her 30th, the best they could afford was a budget cake, lukewarm soda, and a silent, tired apartment. Kevin and Ruth were running a little late, Kevin had texted. Mom insisted on picking up something special. Jasmine glanced at the time, then at the door. Her stomach twisted. She straightened a stack of paper cups just to keep her hands busy. A knock broke the silence. Her heart perked up, then immediately dropped. Kevin never knocked. Ruth barged. Neighbors usually shouted first. Jasmine opened the door. The hallway suddenly seemed narrower, smaller, when Eleanor White stepped into view. Tall, immaculately dressed in a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than Jasmine's entire monthly salary, and Eleanor stood there with a sleek leather bag over one arm and a small, elegant gift bag dangling from her fingers. The scent of expensive perfume followed her in, effortlessly pushing aside the smell of burnt wax and cheap food. "Aunt Eleanor?" Jasmine blinked. "I thought you were overseas." "I was." Eleanor's sharp eyes swept over Jasmine's face, then past her into the apartment. But my only niece is turning 30. I'm not about to miss that. She stepped inside. The effect was immediate. The tiny living room, with its sagging banner and dollar store streamers, suddenly looked like a sad stage set. Eleanor's gaze moved slowly, the peeling paint, the mismatched chairs, the too small TV, the cheap cake on its scratched table. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the folded easel shoved behind the couch, half hidden like something shameful. Is this it? She asked quietly. Jasmine flushed. We're, keeping it simple this year. Kevin and I are saving. For the house. You know how things are. Eleanor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A house, she repeated. Right. She set the small gift bag on the table, but didn't sit. Instead, she walked over to the corner where Jasmine's paints were stacked in a plastic crate. You're still working from here? Eleanor asked, picking up a worn brush. For now, Jasmine said quickly. Once things are better, Eleanor echoed, her tone flat. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ceiling fan clicking rhythmically as it circled. Then Eleanor turned, fully facing her niece. Happy birthday, Jasmine, she said, voice calm but edged with something dangerous. I hope you're not letting fear talk you out of your future. Jasmine forced a smile. I'm trying my best. Eleanor studied her for a long second. Then, with that same unsettling calm, she asked, Tell me, are you already using the $100,000 I sent to your joint account for your studio? Or did you and Kevin run into some kind of trouble with the transfer? The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung in the air, heavy and impossible. 100,000? Jasmine repeated, her throat suddenly dry. To our joint account? Eleanor frowned. Yes, 2 weeks ago. I wired it directly. Your name is on that account, isn't it? Don't tell me you haven't seen it. Jasmine's heart started hammering in her chest. 2 weeks ago. The same week Kevin had come home, sighing about bank issues. The same week Ruth had lectured her about grown women not chasing childish dreams. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And at that exact moment, the front door swung open. Kevin stumbled in first, laughing too loudly, arms loaded with glossy shopping bags from luxury boutiques. A gleaming watch flashed on his wrist. Behind him, Ruth marched in, clutching a box with an expensive appliance logo stamped across it, her eyes already searching for things to criticize. They both froze when they saw Eleanor standing in the middle of the room. The sagging banner rustled slightly in the fan's weak breeze. Jasmine just stared at her husband, then at the bags, then back at her Aunt Eleanor, who was still waiting patiently for an answer to a question that had just shattered Jasmine's entire reality. Kevin froze in the doorway mid-laugh as his eyes landed on Eleanor. The sound died in his throat. He was wearing a crisp shirt Jasmine had never seen before, the fabric smooth and expensive, paired with spotless designer sneakers. Glossy shopping bags dangled from both his hands, logos from high-end boutiques. Printed loud and clear on the sides. A new, gleaming watch hugged his wrist, gold catching the weak light of the living room. Behind him, Ruth stepped in, her perfume arriving before her voice. She wore a structured dress in a deep emerald shade, the kind Jasmine had once pointed out online and dismissed as for rich people. In her hands, she clutched a large appliance box with a luxury brand name splashed across it, the kind store displays usually kept under glass. For a second, nobody spoke. The sagging banner swayed. The cheap cake candle gave a tiny hiss as wax dripped onto the plastic plate. Oh, Kevin finally said, forcing a smile. Eleanor, we didn't know you were coming. I can tell, she replied, eyes flicking over his watch, the bags, the box in Ruth's arms. Ruth recovered first. Well, this is a surprise, she said tightly. We were just out picking up a few things. For the home. Jasmine's mind spun. Home. Things for the home. The same home she had been told they could not afford yet. The same week she had been told the transfer had failed. Kevin shifted, dropping the bags to the floor with a soft thud. Jazz, why don't you sit? He said quickly. About the money your aunt mentioned, the bank has just been moving slowly. International stuff, you know how it is. There's probably a delay, but I'm handling it. Eleanor's expression did not change. Is that so? She said. She reached into her bag with deliberate calm and pulled out a neat folder. Because my bank called me this morning. They were very clear. The transfer went through immediately. No delays. No issues. She opened the folder and laid the papers on the table, right next to the cheap cake. Transaction details, dates, balances. A clear line showing one deposit of $100,000 into the joint account. Then, almost instantly, a series of withdrawals. Jasmine stared at the numbers. Her hands began to shake. We were going to use it wisely, Kevin blurted out. For us. For the future. Not just for some risky business idea. Eleanor ignored him. She slipped out another set of sheets. Printed images, enlarged from security cameras and receipts. One showed Kevin at a glass counter, grinning as a clerk fastened the same gold watch around his wrist. Another showed Ruth, hair perfectly styled, signing for the delivery of a massive stainless steel appliance in a showroom kitchen. $10,000, Eleanor said evenly, tapping the photo of Ruth. On a top-of-the-line appliance. For your mother's kitchen. Not Jasmine's. Jasmine felt something inside her crack, slow and clean. The frugal birthday. The cancelled studio plans. The lectures about sacrifice and responsibility. All while they smiled to her face and spent her chance at a future on their own comfort. She looked from the watch to the appliance box to the statements on the table. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a bank delay. They had taken the money meant for her dream and turned it into their shopping spree. Kevin's mouth opened and closed without sound, like he was trying to find the right script and kept grabbing the wrong one. Okay, he finally stammered, hands half raised as if he could push the truth back into the folder. Okay, look, this is being blown way out of proportion. I was going to put it back. We were going to put it back. It was just a temporary use of funds. Temporary. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. You emptied the account within 48 hours. Kevin's eyes darted to Jasmine. Jazz, listen, I didn't want you stressed. I was handling things. We needed a reliable car. We needed to upgrade some things. I thought, if I could get us more comfortable first, then we'd talk about your studio. I swear, I never meant for it to look like this. Like this. As if the problem was how it looked, not what he had done. And the watch? Eleanor asked, her gaze dropping pointedly to his wrist. Was that for Jasmine's comfort too? Kevin swallowed. The gold against his skin suddenly seemed gaudy, almost vulgar. He tugged his sleeve down. It was a mistake, he muttered. I panicked. Your money is a lot. I thought you'd hardly notice. You're always spending, traveling, doing big things. I didn't think you'd actually check. Jasmine flinched at that. Not the money. The casual way he admitted he had counted on her aunt not paying attention. Unbelievable, Eleanor said. She looked more weary than angry now. You lied to your wife, Kevin. You stole from her. From me. And you did it with help. Ruth, who had stayed unusually quiet, finally exploded. Oh, enough, she snapped, stepping forward, box still clutched in her arms. Enough with this dramatics. Nobody stole anything. That money came into a joint account. Joint. Kevin is her husband. He has every right to use it for their life together. For their life, Eleanor repeated, eyes narrowing. Whose kitchen is that appliance for? Ruth lifted her chin. For our family. For when we have gatherings. For when Jasmine finally grows up and hosts properly instead of serving cheap snacks on chipped plates. Jasmine's throat tightened. The cheap plates had been bought on sale after a long shift, because that was all she could manage. Ruth's gaze landed on her, and whatever patience she had been pretending to hold dissolved. You know what the real problem is? Ruth spat. Your little fantasy world. Paint and canvases and dreams of a studio. At almost 30. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? How delusional. Ruth, Kevin said weakly, but she ignored him. Kevin has been killing himself trying to be responsible, trying to build a real future, she went on, voice rising. A house, stability, a decent life. And what have you been doing, Jasmine? Playing with colors and calling it work. Posting pictures online and hoping someone will throw you a few dollars. Jasmine felt the words land, heavy and familiar. She had heard versions of them whispered, implied, softened. Never this raw. Ruth jabbed a finger toward the bank statements on the table. That money was a gift, she said. And, if you ask me, it was a gift for Kevin. A bonus for putting up with an unambitious wife who still thinks she's some kind of prodigy. He deserves something for all the sacrifices he's made, constantly saying no to things he wants just because you want to chase a childish hobby. A bonus, Eleanor repeated quietly. For putting up with her. Ruth's eyes flashed. Yes, exactly. You should be grateful he stayed with you at all, with your head always in the clouds. He has been patient. We thought it was only fair that he finally got something back. Something in the air shifted. For the first time that night, Jasmine did not feel small. She felt strangely still, as if her mind had stepped out of her body and was watching from the doorway. A bonus. For putting up with her. Kevin tried to speak, but Eleanor raised her hand and the room fell silent. Thank you for the honesty, Ruth, she said. It makes what happens next much simpler. She reached into her bag again and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen once. I didn't come here unprepared, she continued. When my bank called, I already suspected foul play. So I called someone too. There was a knock at the door. Kevin flinched. Ruth frowned. Eleanor didn't turn around. Come in, she called. The door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped inside, carrying a slim leather portfolio. His presence seemed to pull the room into focus. Jasmine, Eleanor said, finally looking back at her niece. This is Daniel. My attorney. Daniel gave a small nod. Good evening. I apologize for the intrusion, but given the circumstances, time is important. Ruth bristled. What is this? You think you can march in here with a lawyer and scare us? You should be scared, Eleanor said, not unkindly. Because what you did is called misappropriation of funds. And given the amount and the evidence we have, it can very easily become a criminal case. Daniel set the portfolio on the table and opened it, sliding several documents out in a neat stack. The facts are clear, he said, his tone calm and factual. A substantial transfer was made as a gift to Jasmine. The money entered a joint account she shares with her husband. Within days, nearly the full amount was withdrawn and spent on items that demonstrably benefit Kevin and his mother, not Jasmine, and certainly not any agreed-upon shared investment. There were also explicit lies told about a supposed transfer failure. Kevin's face had gone pale. Look, we can work this out, he said, voice trembling now. We don't need lawyers. Eleanor, please. Put those away. I'll pay you back. We'll pay you back. Just give us some time. Don't ruin my life over this. That sentence, Daniel said, almost gently, is why I am here. Your life is already in danger of being ruined. Prison tends to do that. Kevin's knees seemed to weaken. He grabbed the back of a chair. Ruth stepped closer to him, furious. Nobody is going to prison, she snapped. You cannot do this to my son. He is not a criminal. He is a good man who made a mistake. A mistake, Eleanor said. A calculated theft, followed by gaslighting and insults, protected by a mother who calls it a bonus. You are both adults. You made choices. She looked at Jasmine. But Jasmine has a choice too. Starting now. Daniel slid a pen across the table, then rotated the top document so it faced Jasmine. These, he said, are divorce papers, already prepared based on the evidence and the accounts I reviewed with Ms. White. Along with them is a settlement agreement. It requires full restitution of the $100,000, plus a reasonable amount of interest, and transfers ownership of any assets bought with those funds to Jasmine. In exchange, we agree not to pursue criminal charges. Kevin jerked his head up. You can't be serious. Divorce? Tonight? On her birthday? Jasmine's hand went instinctively to the ring on her finger. Of course she's not signing that, Ruth scoffed. She's emotional. This is manipulation. You can't corner her like this. Eleanor spoke softly. No one is cornering her. Jasmine, if you want time, we will take time. If you want to think, we will think. But understand this clearly. If they refuse to sign these agreements, Daniel files charges in the morning. The bank statements, the photos, the text messages about the failed transfer, all of it goes into the record. There will be police. There will be court dates. There will be headlines. Kevin swallowed hard. Jazz, please. Tell her you don't want that. We can fix this. We can go back to how things were. Jasmine looked at him. She saw the watch, the bags, the way he had stood in her doorway and tried to spin a story even with the truth laid out in front of him. She heard Ruth calling her a burden, a delusion, a child. She saw her own reflection in the dark TV screen behind him, a woman in a cheap paper crown, standing in a life that had never really been hers. I don't want to go back to how things were, she said quietly. The words surprised even her with how steady they sounded. She stepped closer to the table. Daniel handed her the pen. Jasmine, Kevin whispered, panic roughening his voice. She did not look at him. She skimmed just enough of the pages to see her own name, the amount, the transfer of assets. Then, without hesitation, she signed. First the divorce petition, then the settlement agreement. Her signature flowed across the lines, firm and decisive. When she was done, she set the pen down and slipped the ring off her finger. It left a pale indent behind. She placed it gently on top of the stack of documents. Behind her, Kevin made a small, broken sound. Ruth gasped, then started swearing under her breath about ungrateful girls and homewreckers. Jasmine did not react. For the first time all evening, she felt something close to relief. The life she thought she had was gone. But in its place, something new, something honest, was beginning to form. Within a week, Jasmine was standing in a very different room. The space smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, sunlight pouring in through wide front windows that looked out onto a quiet street. The floors were bare concrete, smooth and cool under her sneakers. Blank walls stretched on either side, waiting. Her art sat in clusters around the room, canvases leaning against boxes of brushes and jars of pigment. A small desk stood in one corner, still half-assembled. A rolled-up rug rested near the door, ready to be unfurled. This is it, the leasing agent said, handing her the keys. 1-year lease, as discussed. Deposit cleared, first 3 months paid. Jasmine took the keys. The metal was cool against her palm, heavy in a completely different way from her wedding ring. Thank you, she said. After Daniel had filed the paperwork, the account had been frozen. The watch was sold. The appliance was returned at a loss. Combined with an emergency transfer from Eleanor and some pressure applied in the right places, the full $100,000 had been pulled back into an account in Jasmine's name only. The divorce filing had gone in the same day. Now, exactly 7 days after her quiet, ruined birthday, she was signing a very different kind of document, the lease for her first studio. She spent the afternoon dragging furniture into place, arranging canvases, and lining up her paints on a set of simple shelves. As the sun dropped, the light shifted to a warm gold, washing the room in a soft glow. That evening, a small group gathered in the studio. There was no banner this time, no cheap decorations. Just a folding table with simple food, a decent cake, and a bottle of sparkling juice. Eleanor insisted on opening herself. You don't christen a new life with flat soda, she said. A few cousins came. An old friend from art school arrived straight from work, still in her uniform, eyes shining as she took in the space. The leasing agent stopped by briefly to congratulate her. Eleanor moved through the room like she belonged there, asking about lighting and display options. Jasmine stood in the center, heart full, watching people look at her paintings with genuine interest. Not as clutter. Not as a childish habit. As work. As art. There were no toasts about sacrifice or lectures about responsibility. Only quiet, sincere congratulations and questions about her first exhibition. Later, when the last guest left and the door clicked shut, Jasmine sat on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at the empty easel in the middle of the room. Her phone buzzed beside her. A message from a former coworker. Have you seen this? It read, followed by a link. She opened it. A local business blog had picked up a story circulating from public records and office gossip. A mid-level employee fired from his firm after being implicated in a financial scandal involving his wife's inheritance. There was no need to click the man's name to know who they meant. Another message came in, this time from a neighbor at her old building. A shaky video showed Kevin in a cheap suit, standing in a long line at a job fair, avoiding the camera, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. She watched for a moment, then locked her phone. The next day, more links arrived. A grainy CCTV clip from a high-end boutique had leaked online. It showed Ruth at the customer service counter, red-faced and wild-eyed, arguing with a clerk who kept shaking his head. The caption explained that she was demanding a full refund for an appliance long after the return window had closed, screaming about stolen money and injustice, while other customers watched. The comments were brutal. Jasmine put the phone face down on her desk. Their downfall was loud, messy, and public. Exactly the opposite of how she wanted her life to be. She stood, walked to the easel, and rested her hand on the smooth wooden frame. The studio was quiet. Outside, cars passed slowly. Somewhere down the street, someone laughed. She picked up a pencil and drew the first line on a fresh canvas. The past week had taken her marriage, her illusions, and her old life. In return, it had given her something she had never truly had before. Her own space. Her own work. Her own future. Jasmine smiled to herself, then began to sketch in earnest, the sound of graphite on canvas steady and sure in the still, bright room.